What if the most devastating failure of your year was actually a sophisticated act of self-protection orchestrated by your own soul? We are taught from birth that a life well lived is a straight line of ascending victories, a ladder where every rung is a reached goal and every missed step is a sign of weakness. But ancient wisdom and the deep structures of the psyche suggest something far more mysterious. The moments when your plans collapsed, when the doors slammed shut, and when the ground seemed to vanish beneath your feet might not have been a conspiracy of the universe against you, but a radical intervention to save you from a destiny that was too small for who you are becoming. Think of your life not as a blueprint you must follow, but as an alchemical process where the heat that burns your current structure is the only thing that can release the gold hidden within. When we plan, we do so with the eyes of the ego, a part of us that craves safety, predictability, and social validation. However, there is a silent architect within you, a higher self that operates on a much longer timeline and a far deeper frequency. This architect knows when a path has become a prison, even if that prison is paved with the comforts of a stable job or a familiar relationship. The collapse you experienced was the breaking of the shell, a necessary ruin that precedes every genuine spiritual birth. There is a specific pattern to these sacred ruins, a signature that distinguishes a mere mistake from a profound recalibration of your entire reality. In this journey, we will first decode the mystery of the sacred ruin and why the soul often chooses the path of the desert as its primary forge. We will then explore the ancient myth of Persephone and the Eleusinian Mysteries to understand the psychological necessity of the descent into the underworld. We will examine how your failures, when misunderstood, trap you in a loop of low vibration and fatalistic self-condemnation. To break this cycle, we will look at two powerful technologies of the spirit: the witness consciousness of the East and the rigorous examination of conscience found in the Christian tradition, showing how these practices provide a stable anchor when the external world falls apart. Finally, we will bridge these spiritual insights with the transformative power of modern psychology and neuroplasticity, revealing how you can use the ashes of this year to rebuild a life governed not by external luck, but by internal sovereignty. If your plans fell apart, it is because you were being called to stop being a victim of your circumstances and start becoming the conscious protagonist of your own transformation. So if the world you built has crumbled, where do you actually stand when there is no ground left? To understand why your plans collapsed, we must first change how we view the concept of the low point. In modern culture, we are obsessed with the light, with the harvest, and with the high noon of success. We treat the dark periods of life as errors in the system, as if we have somehow failed the curriculum of existence. But the ancient wisdom of the Eleusinian Mysteries suggests a very different reality. They centered their most sacred rites on the myth of Persephone, the goddess who was pulled from the flowery meadows of the surface world into the dark, silent depths of the underworld. To the uninitiated, her story looks like a tragedy of loss and abduction, but to the mystics, it was an initiation. Persephone did not go to the underworld to die. She went there to become its queen. She discovered a power in the darkness that the bright, sunny meadows could never provide. This is the first paradigm shift we must embrace. Your bad year was not a detour from your path. It was a descent into the fertile soil of your own soul. Think of your life as a grand, ancient library. Most of the time, we stay in the well-lit reading rooms on the upper floors, browsing the books of our daily routines and social masks. But occasionally the floorboards give way, and we find ourselves in the damp, dark basement of the archives. It is cold, it is frightening, and nothing looks familiar. Yet, this is the only place where the original blueprints of your life are kept. You cannot renovate the building of your destiny while staying in the penthouse. You have to go to the foundation. This is what the alchemists called the nigredo, or the blackening. It is the stage where the material must be broken down, decomposed, and stripped of its previous form. Without this decomposition, there can be no transmutation into gold. If you feel like your life has turned to ash, it is because the universe is preparing the ground for a version of you that is no longer flammable. This is where the psychological perspective of giants, like Marie-Louise von France, becomes essential. She often remarked that the psyche does not care about your comfort, it cares about your wholeness. From the perspective of psychological astrology, a difficult transit, or a period of intense restriction, is not a piece of bad luck from a capricious god. Instead, it is the manifestation of a psychic gravity, Just as a forest fire clears the dead wood to allow new seeds to germinate, these periods of sacred ruin clear the psychological clutter that was preventing your authentic self from breathing. We often mistake the death of our illusions for the death of our potential. We cling to the burning house, not realizing that the architect is actually clearing the lot for a palace. The danger is not the collapse itself, but the stories we tell ourselves while we are in the ruins. When our plans fail, we often fall into a loop of auto-condemnation, a vibrational spiral where we convince ourselves that we are fundamentally broken or cursed. We look at our bank accounts, our empty beds, or our stalled careers, and we say, "This is who I am." But what if this collapse is actually a promotion you didn't ask for? What if the unforeseen disaster was actually a strategic strike by your higher self to prevent you from succeeding at something that would have eventually destroyed your spirit? This isn't just a comforting thought, it is a fundamental shift in sovereignty. By moving from the role of the victim to the role of the initiate, you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and begin to ask, "What is this preparing me for?" There is a specific state of being, a psychological and spiritual anchor that allows you to navigate this underworld without being consumed by it. It is a secret known to both the Stoics and the sages of the East, and it is the bridge between the ruins of your past and the masterpiece of your future. We are about to explore the mechanics of this observer state and how it allows you to stand in the center of the storm while remaining completely untouched. To navigate the ruins of a year that didn't go as planned, we must move beyond mere survival and into the art of conscious reconstruction. This is not about positive thinking or pretending the pain isn't real. It is about accessing a set of psychological and spiritual technologies that have been used by the wisest among us for thousands of years. We will explore 5 pillars of transformation that bridge the gap between your current frustration and your ultimate sovereignty. The first pillar, the fortress of the silent witness. When your world collapses, the first thing that happens is an overwhelming identification with the wreckage. You feel like you are the failed business, the ended relationship, or the stagnant bank account. This is a cognitive trap, a state of spiritual amnesia where the soul forgets its own nature. Ancient traditions across the globe recognize this danger and develop sophisticated spiritual technologies to guard against it. In the East, the Vedic masters spoke of sakshi, or witness consciousness. Simultaneously, in the Christian tradition, a parallel technology emerged through the examination of conscience, a practice that allows the soul to stand before a sacred mirror and observe its life without being consumed by it. Both practices teach that the greatest error is to confuse the waves on the surface for the ocean itself. In the Christian path, the examination is not an exercise in destructive guilt, which is a loop of low vibration and fatalism, but a practice of contrition. Guilt looks backward to shame you. Contrition looks forward to restore your sovereignty. When you sit in the silence of an internal examen, you are not merely tallying mistakes. You are stepping back to observe your actions through the eyes of an internal witness or the Holy Spirit. You realize that you are the one who observed the failure, which means you are not the failure itself. You are the space in which the failure happened. Imagine you are sitting in a dark theater, watching a movie of your life. On the screen, the protagonist, the version of you that lives in the world, is facing a sequence of disasters. You see them cry, you see them struggle, and you see their plans crumble. If you're a good spectator, you might feel empathy, but you do not stand up and scream at the screen as if the light and shadows are real. You know that you are the one sitting in the seat, safe and separate from the drama. This is the state of the witness. It is the part of your consciousness that observes your thoughts, your failures, and even your most intense pain without being consumed by them. The sages of the Vedanta taught that this witness is your true home. It is the only part of you that is never affected by bad years. When you cultivate this state, you create a psychological distance between the event and your identity. You stop saying, "I am a failure," and start saying, "I am observing a moment of failure." This might seem like a small linguistic shift, but it is a massive energetic liberation. By becoming the observer, you stop feeding the loop of low vibration. You stop the bleeding of your vital energy into a past that cannot be changed. The practice for this pillar is the daily decoupling. Every evening for 5 minutes, sit in silence and mentally review the day's frustrations, not as a participant, but as a neutral reporter. Watch the emotions arise and watch them pass. Do not judge them, just label them. There is a thought of anxiety. There is a sensation of tightness in the chest. By labeling the experience, you reclaim the power of the one who labels. You remind yourself that you are the sky, and the failed plans are just clouds passing through. The sky doesn't try to hold onto a storm. It simply allows the storm to happen until it runs out of energy. This internal stability is the prerequisite for everything else. Once you are no longer drowning in the emotion of the collapse, you can begin to look at the wreckage with a different kind of eyes. You move from the passive suffering of the witness to the active choosing of the architect. This brings us to a fundamental question. Even in the middle of a ruins, do you still possess the freedom to decide who you are? The second pillar, the sovereignty of the inner space. There is a profound psychological truth that was forged in the darkest conditions imaginable. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived the concentration camps of the Second World War, discovered what he called the last of the human freedoms. He observed that even when every external choice is taken away, when your plans, your dignity, and your very clothes are stripped from you, there remains a small, sacred space between a stimulus and your response. In that space lies your power to choose your attitude. This is the cornerstone of logotherapy, a school of psychology that suggests our primary drive is not pleasure or power, but meaning. Frankl argued that we don't necessarily need a life free of suffering. We need a life where the suffering makes sense. When your year falls apart, the ego feels like a victim of fate. But from the perspective of the inner sovereign, the collapse is a stimulus, and your response is the canvas upon which you paint your character. You might not have chosen the bankruptcy or the breakup, but you are the only one who chooses what those events mean. Does the closed door mean you are unworthy? Or does it mean the universe is forcing you to develop a skill you would have otherwise ignored? This is where we see the freedom of destiny. You are not a leaf blown by the wind of cosmic transits. You are the one who decides how to set the sail. Frankl's insight is complemented by the work of Alfred Adler, who believed in the creative power of the individual. Adler suggested that we are not determined by our past, but by the goals we set for our future. He called this teleology, the idea that we are pulled forward by our purposes. If your plans failed, perhaps it is because they were the wrong goals for the person you were meant to become. The creative power within you may have sabotaged a lesser success to prepare you for a greater purpose. The practice here is the reframing of the ruin. Look at the most painful event of your year and ask yourself, if I were the hero of a legend, what virtue would this specific challenge be forcing me to develop? Is it patience? Is it self-reliance? Is it the courage to start over? When you find the virtue, you find the meaning. And once a pain has meaning, it ceases to be suffering and becomes an initiation. But as you begin to find this meaning, you may encounter an internal resistance, a heavy, dark weight that pulls you back into the old patterns. This leads us to the most misunderstood aspect of the human journey, the gold that is hidden in your darkest traits. The third pillar, the alchemical integration of the shadow. When life doesn't go as planned, our shadow, the part of our psyche we have repressed or judged, often comes roaring to the surface. Carl Jung and his brilliant collaborator, Marie-Louise von Franz, explained that we all carry a dark twin within us. This twin contains our unexpressed anger, our hidden ambitions, and our deepest fears. Most of us spend our lives trying to be good and aligned, pushing this shadow into the basement. But when a crisis hits, the shadow breaks the lock. A failed year is often a year where the shadow was finally seen. Perhaps you discovered that beneath your nice exterior, there was a well of resentment. Perhaps your stable life collapsed because you were secretly sabotaging yourself to escape a boredom you couldn't admit to. Von Franz, in her studies on alchemy and fairy tales, noted that the nigredo, the stage of darkness and decay, is where the most valuable material is found. In alchemy, you cannot create the elixir of life until you have faced the black sun. Marie-Louise von Franz noted that this decomposition is essential for wholeness. In the Christian tradition, this is the profound state known as the dark night of the soul, described by St. John of the Cross. It is a period where all spiritual and material comforts are stripped away. It feels like a provaso, a trial by the devil or the adversary, designed to lead you into despair. But the mystic knows the truth. The darkness is not a sign of abandonment, but a sign of intense purification. The night occurs because the light of your higher self is so bright that it temporarily blinds the ego. You are not being punished. You are being prepared for a union with your true purpose that the old version of you could never have handled. In psychological astrology, this is often represented by the heavy hand of Saturn or the transformative fire of Pluto. These aren't just planets. They are archetypes of the psyche. They demand that you stop lying to yourself. If you lost your job, was it because your shadow was already miserable there? If a relationship ended, was it because your shadow was hungry for a truth you were too afraid to speak? Integrating the shadow means looking at your failures and asking, what part of me actually wanted this to happen? This is a terrifying question, but it is the most liberating one you will ever ask. It moves you from being a victim of bad luck to being a participant in your own evolution. The shadow is not a monster to be defeated. It is a source of immense energy that has been misdirected. The anger you feel about your year can be turned into the fuel for your next project. The grief you feel can be turned into a deep, empathetic connection with others. The practice for shadow integration is the mirror dialogue. When you feel a strong negative emotion, envy of someone else's success or bitterness about your own loss, sit with that feeling. Don't push it away. Ask it, what are you trying to protect? What desire of mine have I been ignoring? When you give the shadow a voice, it stops needing to scream through the destruction of your external life. You begin to walk as a whole human being, carrying both your light and your darkness. And in that wholeness, you become unfuckwithable. However, even with this integration, there is a period of transition that cannot be rushed. It is the phase of the sacred withdrawal, where the soul must go into hiding to process the transformation. The fourth pillar, the sacred withdrawal and the inner hierophant. In our hyper-connected, productivity-obsessed world, we are told that when things go wrong, we must get back on the horse immediately. We are told to hustle, rebrand, and pivot before the dust of the collapse has even settled. But the ancients knew better. They understood the necessity of the temenos, a sacred, enclosed space where the outside world cannot reach. This is the archetypal path of the hermit, a spiritual technology designed to protect the soul during its most vulnerable transformations. We see this move perfected by the desert fathers of the early Christian tradition. They recognized that when the world becomes a place of suffocating noise and spiritual distraction, the only way to find the truth is to flee into the silence of the wilderness. When your year fails, you are essentially being invited into your own internal dhibaid. This withdrawal is not an act of cowardice or escape. It is a spiritual anachoresis, a tactical retreat to the inner citadel. It is here, in the absence of external validation, that you can finally distinguish between the chaotic whispers of the world and the still, small voice of the inner hierophant. In this desert of the soul, you reclaim your identity not as a worker, a partner, or a success story, but as a child of the infinite. When life breaks your plans, your soul enters a state of shock, much like a seed that must remain in the dark, cold ground before it can sprout. It needs a period of incubation. Just as the initiates of the Eleusinian Mysteries had to spend time in silence and fasting before the great revelation, you must allow your current ruin to sit in stillness. This is because the voice of your higher self is a whisper, not a shout. It cannot be heard over the frantic noise of a social media feed, the misguided advice of friends, or the ego's desperate demands to fix everything now. The sacred withdrawal is the time where you stop trying to fix the old life and start listening for the blueprint of the new one. The failure of your plans is often a forced invitation to withdraw. It is the universe saying, stop looking outside for the answer. The map is being redrawn and the instructions are inside. This is the time for what the Stoics called anachoresis, a retreat into the inner citadel. It is not an act of cowardice. It is an act of strategic recalibration. During this withdrawal, your primary tool is the consultation of the unconscious, primarily through dreams and deep contemplation. When the ego is defeated, the unconscious becomes more active. Your dreams during a ruined year are often incredibly vivid and symbolic. They are the soul's way of communicating where the energy is moving. If you dream of fire, it may be the burning of the old. If you dream of water, it is the cleansing of the past. The practice for this pillar is the week of silence. If you cannot do a week, do a weekend, or even just 3 hours. Turn off every screen, remove every distraction, go to a park, a church, or a quiet room. Do not try to solve your life. Simply sit with the question, who am I when I am not my plans? Listen to the silence. Write down whatever arises, no matter how strange. You are looking for the still, small voice. This is the only voice that can tell you the true direction of your next chapter. The world will wait. Your soul, however, will not wait forever to be heard. Once you have heard that voice, you are no longer just a philosopher in the ruins. You are ready to become a biological and neurological engineer of your own future. The fifth pillar, the neuroplasticity of fate. The final piece of this puzzle is the bridge between the mystical and the material. We often speak of vibration and energy as abstract concepts, but modern neuroscience has a more concrete term for it: neuroplasticity. Your brain is not a static machine. It is a dynamic, ever-changing organ that literally reshapes itself based on your repeated thoughts, emotions, and actions. This is the biological mechanism of what we call destiny. When you spend a year in a loop of failure, fear, and self-condemnation, you are physically carving neural highways of defeat into your brain. You become biologically addicted to the stress chemicals of your own tragedy. This is why people often experience runs of bad luck. It is not that the universe is picking on them. It is that their nervous system has become a magnet for the familiar frequency of crisis. They are tuned to the disaster station, and their brain filters out every opportunity that doesn't fit that broadcast. But the miracle of neuroplasticity is that you can rewire your fate. This is where the work of psychologists like Alfred Adler meets the cutting edge of brain science. Adler spoke of the style of life, the habitual way we move through the world. By consciously changing your small daily habits and your internal narrative, you are physically changing the structure of your brain. You are decommissioning the highways of failure and building the avenues of sovereignty. This is not fake it till you make it. This is embody it until you become it. If you want a life of peace and purpose, you must start providing your brain with the peace and purpose chemicals today, even in the middle of the ruins. This is done through deliberate micro-actions. The practice for this final pillar is the 1% shift. Every day, identify one small habit that belongs to the old, failed version of you and replace it with a habit that belongs to the sovereign, future version of you. If the old version wakes up and immediately checks the news to see what else is going wrong, the new version wakes up and does 3 minutes of deep breathing. If the old version spends the evening ruminating on lost money, the new version spends 20 minutes learning a new skill. These are not just good habits. They are signals to your nervous system that the old timeline is over. You are literally teaching your neurons that the year of the ruin has ended and the year of the architect has begun. As you align your biology with your spiritual insight, the external world has no choice but to follow. You are no longer waiting for the year to get better. You are becoming the person for whom good and bad are simply different types of fuel. You have moved through the witness, the sovereign, the shadow, the withdrawal, and the rewiring. Now you stand at the edge of the most important part of this journey, the moment when the collapse ends and the true birth begins. Here is where we must face a possibility that challenges our very understanding of cause and effect. We have explored how the ruins of your year were a sacred intervention, a psychological clearing, and a biological recalibration. But there is a deeper, more mind-bending layer to this mystery. What if the collapse of your plans wasn't just a reaction to your past mistakes, but a deliberate temporal interference sent from your future? Modern physics and ancient mysticism both suggest that time might not be the rigid, forward-moving arrow we perceive it to be. In the quantum realm, retrocausality is a documented phenomenon where an event in the future can influence an event in the past. Spiritually, many traditions speak of the higher self, or the guardian angel, as a version of you that has already completed the journey, a part of your consciousness that exists outside the constraints of linear time. Imagine for a moment that the version of you who is 5 years in the future, the version who has found true purpose, profound love, and internal peace, is looking back at you right now. That future self can see exactly where the road you were on was leading. They can see that the successful promotion you wanted this year would have led to a terminal burnout 3 years from now. They can see that the relationship you were desperate to save was actually a slow-acting poison for your soul. From that higher vantage point, the kindest thing your future self could do was to break your current reality. They sent an echo backward through time to trip you up, to close that door, and to force you into the ruins where you are finally available for a better path. Your intuition, your gut feelings, and even the coincidences that ruined your plans are the messages from a you that already knows the way home. This changes the entire flavor of your pain. You are not a victim of a cruel universe. You are the beneficiary of a brilliant future self-intervention. The vertigo you feel in the middle of this crisis is not the feeling of falling. It is the feeling of being pulled upward by a version of yourself that refuses to let you settle for less. If this is true, it carries a profound responsibility. It means you can no longer afford the luxury of being a victim. When you understand that your failures are actually divine sabotages meant to save you, the posture of self-pity becomes obsolete. You are standing in the middle of a blank slate, a tabula rasa that the universe has cleared specifically for your most authentic work. This is the moment of the great work, what the alchemists called the magnum opus. You are no longer building on top of old, rotting foundations. You are starting fresh, but with a degree of awareness you never possessed before. The responsibility of awakening is to realize that your vibration in this very moment is the brush that paints your next timeline. Every time you choose to forgive yourself for this failed year, you are sending a signal of power into the quantum field. Every time you choose to view your ruins as a laboratory rather than a grave, you are claiming your sovereignty as a creator. Think about the ethics of your own existence. If you are indeed a conscious fragment of the cosmos experiencing itself through a human form, then your only real sin is to live a life that is smaller than your potential. The collapse of your year was the universe's way of correcting that sin. It was a violent act of love. Now the question is, what will you do with this hard-won freedom? The person you were before the collapse is gone. They were a character in a story that has reached its final page. You are the author, and you are currently staring at a beautiful, terrifying, empty chapter. This is where you must apply the sovereignty of the inner space. You must live as if the future you desire is already a historical fact. You don't wait for the money to feel abundant. You treat your current resources with the respect and wisdom of an abundant person. You don't wait for the right partner to feel worthy of love. You treat yourself with the dignity and care of someone who is deeply cherished. You are not trying to change. You are aligning with the version of you that your future self is already cheering for. This is the only way to close the loop and turn the sacred ruin into a sacred foundation. We began this journey by looking at the wreckage of a year that didn't go as planned. We have traveled through the dark underworld of Persephone, the silent halls of the witness consciousness, the psychological deep dives of Jung and von Franz, and the biological frontiers of neuroplasticity. We have discovered that failure is not the opposite of success, but the forge in which success is actually made durable. But after all the explanations and all the techniques, we are left with the ultimate mystery, the one that no book or video can fully resolve. If you can observe your thoughts, then you are not your thoughts. If you can observe your failures, then you are not your failures. If you can observe your very identity changing over time, then who exactly is the one doing the observing? Perhaps the real purpose of a bad year is to strip away everything you thought you were until only the observer remains. Perhaps the universe doesn't want you to just have a better life. It wants you to realize that you are the life that is happening. The ancient Hermetic text, the Emerald Tablet, famously says, "As above, so below, as within, so without." This implies that the entire cosmos is not something you are wandering through. The cosmos is something that is happening within the space of your own consciousness. If this is true, then your failed plans were never actually your plans to begin with. They were the plans of a character in a play. But you are the theater itself. You are the vast, silent space in which all plans, all ruins, and all rebirths take place. The failure of this year was simply the theater lights going dark so that a much more magnificent play could begin. So, as you step out of the ruins and into the unknown, carry this final question with you. If you are the one who survives every collapse, and if you are the one who observes every rebirth, then how could you ever truly be lost? The hunt for meaning doesn't end when things go right. It begins when we realize that right and wrong are just two different languages the universe uses to speak to us. If these ideas have resonated with you, if you have felt a spark of recognition in the middle of your own ruins, then consider subscribing to this channel. This is a place for seekers, for those who know that the most profound truths are often hidden in the places we are most afraid to look. We are not interested in final answers here, only in the courage to ask deeper questions. The year that didn't go as planned was the greatest gift you could have received. It broke you so that you could finally be whole. The hunt continues.